Hello, everyone. It is a pleasure to be here with you today. I am Creedell Webb, the Chief Diversity, Equity, and Inclusion Officer for the First Judicial District of Pennsylvania, otherwise known as the Philadelphia Courts. Today, I want to open a discussion about ethical challenges we as court professionals face with workplace culture and technology. On today's agenda, we will briefly go over NACM's Model Code of Conduct. Our focus is going to be on Canon 1.1, performing court duties. And the goal is to discuss the ethical challenge in workplace culture as it pertains to 1.1, with not only workplace culture, but also technology. Although we are using NACM's code to guide this discussion, many states have their own codes that contain very similar rules. For instance, in Pennsylvania, we have the Unified Judicial System Pennsylvania Code of Conduct for court employees. For judges, we have the Judicial Code of Conduct. Magisterial district judges have rules governing standards of conduct, and Pennsylvania lawyers have the rules of professional conduct. So no matter what state you're in, you probably have a similar set of rules and similar circumstances. Next, just take a look at the organization of the Model Code of Conduct for court professionals. So as you can see, we have 4 canons. Canon 1, avoiding impropriety and the appearance of impropriety in all activities. Canon 2, performing the duties of the position impartially and diligently. Canon 3, conducting outside activities to minimize the risk of conflict with official position. And Canon 4, refraining from inappropriate political activity. And I think all of these canons are going to be a number of challenges for any court professional. But today we want to focus on Canon 1.1. A court professional faithfully carries out all appropriately assigned duties, striving at all times to perform the work diligently, efficiently, equitably, thoroughly, courteously, honestly, openly, and within the scope of the court professional's authority. Just looking at this canon alone, you can see that there's going to be some challenges that professionals would have at all levels. You want to make sure if you're being efficient, that you're not trading off thoroughness. And there's many places where we can see a balancing act. And let's just go over some of the definitions. You know, we're striving to make sure that our court professionals are characterized by steady and earnest, energetic effort, capable of producing desired results with little to no waste. They're dealing fairly and equally with all concerned. The work is completed thoroughly. They have respect and consideration for others, whether that's the public, their supervisors, managers, and anyone they're interacting with. They're working without cheating, and they're exposed to general view or knowledge while doing all of this within the scope of their professional authority. So I want to tie this in with workplace culture as well as technology. So let's just give a brief definition of what workplace culture is. And according to SHRM, which is the Society for Human Resource Management, an organization's culture defines the proper way to behave within that organization. And when we're thinking about courts, we have various branches and divisions. So the culture, you could even have subcultures. So the culture in the trial division could be different from civil and criminal. You could have subculture with family division. And then even within those various divisions, the units, depending on what those court employees are tasked to do. Do they have to go out to homes? Are they on the streets? Are they behind the desk? Are they dealing with self-represented litigants or attorneys? You know, all that goes into what our workplace culture looks like, and it can vary. It can vary also considering the fact that we have 5 generations in the workforce at once. We also have to make sure that our employees are knowledgeable about the various dimensions of diversity, including things like race, ethnicity, gender identity and expression, disability, veteran status. Now more than ever, we have to be educated about these things to make sure that we're creating an environment that people want to stay in. I want to highlight just a few key findings. So SHRM did a report titled "The Culture Effect: Why Positive Workplace Culture is the New Currency." And it's a very strong statement, but I want to highlight just 3 of the statistics. 53% of working Americans who have left a job due to workplace culture report leaving because of their relationship with their manager. So now more than ever, you know, making sure that people managers are equipped with the tools to make inclusive work environments is crucial. 94% of people managers agree a positive workplace culture creates a resilient team of employees. And when I look at a stat like this, I think about those departments that can sometimes have high turnover. How can we make these jobs and positions more attractive by having a better culture there? 97% of executives agree their actions have a direct impact on workplace culture. So this is when we start to think about administrative leadership and judicial leadership. So now let's take this to technology. In its simplest form, technology can be used to enhance information and operations, improve public access to corporation and services, and reduce administrative costs while increasing efficiency in case processing. Technology can be used as something as a very powerful tool, but as we can see, sometimes technology can be used on the negative side. Courts can get hacked, and we can have security breaches. So we need to be very aware about the pitfalls of technology as well as the benefits. Recommend a webinar offered by the National Center for State Courts titled AI 101, The Promises and Perils of AI in the Courts, because I think this is a technology that we're really going to need to look at moving forward. And before we get back to the NACM code, I want to show you an example of how workplace culture and technology are coming together, even in something as simple as Microsoft Word. So just imagine you're drafting a document, and we used to always have what's known as spell check. I believe you press F7. It doesn't always get it right, but for the most part, if you press it, it can help you fix your documents. Now, with the emergence of the workplace culture and increases in technology, if you go to File, Options, Proofing, Writing Style, Grammar Refinements, and then go to Inclusiveness, you'll find that there's a lot of options for things like age bias, cultural bias, disability bias, gender bias. The list goes on. So as we're growing at this rapid pace, you'll see this in all types of technology. I mean, this is just one example. Another technology I can think of is this PowerPoint presentation I'm doing. So I remember when you used to do PowerPoint presentations years ago, I would have to physically center all these circles and physically make sure that everything was in the right place. And that takes a lot of time, especially if you're doing something like that for work. You know, it goes into your efficiency. How efficient are you being if you have to spend all this time putting circles together and centering them? Microsoft PowerPoint now has a designer mode. So a lot of times you can put down the information that you need to say, click on that designer mode, and it can set up your presentation in a way that looks very professionally done. And I think, again, these are things that just weren't out. Now this is something that we can use every day. So I want to have this conversation about Canon 1.1, performing court duties, but I want to take a look at it from all various court professionals. So that's the challenges that line staff have, supervisors and managers, directors, administrative leaders, all the way up until the judicial leadership. Some of the concerns are going to be the same, but it's going to vary depending on what your role is in the court. And let's take a look first, beginning with our line staff. And I think one of the biggest issues and challenges with line staff in terms of workplace culture is you're starting with legal advice versus legal information, especially when dealing with self-represented litigants. So if you're working in an office where you have someone self-represented come in, they need help, and there's a way that you can tell them or provide them with resources for legal information without giving that legal advice. And just if we're looking at our code being equitable and thorough, but also within the scope of the professional's authority. So let me give you an example. You have an employee that's worked at the courts in the front lines, 10 years. They may know what's going to happen in the case. They may know exactly what you need to write for your motion to look favorable for the judge. But that's not within the scope of that court professional's authority to provide that legal advice. But it could be a challenge, especially if someone is, really pleading and they're crying, that they're upset they can't afford an attorney, and you really want to help. You're trying to balance out these factors, and it can be a very tough balancing act, which is why we need a lot of training. Our line staff need to be able to be courteous, but communicate in a way that they stand by their information. Now, when we look at colleagues, How are they interacting with everybody? Are they making sure that they're aware of various cultural differences and gender bias? Making sure that they are operating as a team and following the chain of command. When we look at some of the technological concerns that our frontline staff have, one, we oftentimes try to think a lot about some of the latest technologies like the cloud and social media, artificial intelligence. However, in courts, oftentimes we have a lot of older technologies that sometimes are not as intuitive. And so you almost would have to rely on some of those employees that have the institutional knowledge for those systems, which I think can be equally as valuable as the employees that are going to be familiar with some of the latest technologies. So let's look at something like artificial intelligence. Now, this refers to the creation of computer systems capable of performing tasks that historically only a human could do. But now we have something that's called generative AI, and it takes it a step further. The computer is able to learn on its own, think on its own, and provide results. This can become a serious problem in some instances with regards to things like cybersecurity or malware. So think about the trainings that we may have received in our courts where they tell us don't open certain emails, or here's how you check a fictitious website. But AI is able to generate all types of deep fakes and things that look real, voices that sound real. And in my opinion, they'll at some point probably start sending out websites that look real, things that could cause viruses. So I think this is something for us to truly pay attention to, so that way that we are protecting the courts. On the other hand, there's going to be some argument that the use of AI, especially if you need to process reports or get certain jobs done, could make your job more efficient. You could be more efficient by using a technology like this. And so I keep these factors at the bottom of each slide just so we can see how there's a sort of trade-off with some of these things. So if you're efficient and you're using the AI, are you double checking over it to make sure the work is thorough? Because this is still an evolving technology, and it doesn't mean that everything that it does is going to be correct. We have seen situations where AI has spit out hallucinations, is what they call it, when it provides things that are not correct. Another area I really want to go is the supervisors, managers, because as I showed in that earlier report, supervisors and managers have a lot to do with the culture of their particular unit. And when we look at ethics, let's think about, are they supervisors and managers willing and able to help those court users when line staff are unable to, right? Let's think about that irate customer who is upset or offended by something that was said, whether that be, and they could be upset based on something that has to do with their identity, whether it's racial or gender or some kind of argument pops up. Are our managers and supervisors equipped to deal with that in a way that's courteous, but in a way that they have that knowledge, in a way that they can deal with the court user openly and honestly, understanding those, having those problem solving skills. But let's look at our supervisors and managers at how they deal with their direct reports. Are they lenient to some employees while being strict towards others, and why? We need to make sure that there's standards across the board in our dealings. And sometimes things can happen with regard to unconscious bias if our supervisors and managers are not trained on knowing what unconscious bias looks like and how it can show up within a court system. Oftentimes people will give a training and it could be on unconscious bias in general, but what does that look like for my job? What does that look like for me? How does it show up? Sometimes we need more tangible steps. And I have examples of, let's take equitable evaluations. There's a lot of research out there nowadays where you can learn about things as something as simple as gender bias. So if you have employees and you're using certain terms to describe your male employees, but then you use other terms that describe your employees who are women or your employees who are non-gender conforming, and you're just doing this completely biased, it may not be a fair assessment of that particular employee. So I always tell court managers and supervisors, look at the types of words that you're using when you're describing employees and make sure you're focusing on how it is that they're working and their workload, and not necessarily using these terms based on their gender. And even if this is something that's happening unconscious, start comparing some of your work and some of the things that you're writing down, and educating yourself on these things, because that's another thing that technology has given to us. Even though it's moving rapidly, there's a lot of classes that we can take out there on various trainings that are offered by colleges for free, courses that we can audit on culture and technology, even on something like artificial intelligence. There's courses out there offered for free that you can audit. Another technological concern that managers and supervisors may have is, how do they deal with a situation when the software shuts down or the hardware shuts down? Are the employees equipped to go back to using the paper systems? And when they are doing this and maybe there's some stress, right? Are they able to still work efficiently and be courteous? Because we all know sometimes the courts can be very fast paced. And so when it's very fast paced and it's high stakes and the pressure is high, sometimes it really can be hard to balance all these factors of the diligence, the efficiency, the equity, the thoroughness. So just performing those court duties, I think that there's a lot that goes into it, more than meets the eye, especially in this busy space. On the positive side, when we think about generative AI and moving forward, this could help managers actually be more efficient, help them write their evaluations, especially as the system gets better. And if they are starting off taking good notes, because we've seen that you can't overuse these kind of technologies and rely on it to do everything. But if you're putting in the proper inputs and you're double checking it, there's a potential that it can really help and assist you with the workload. So I think moving forward, this is going to be huge. And I also want to open the floor, like if anybody has any comments on some of these things, because I think there's going to be more to discuss in terms of the directors and the judicial leadership. But are there any comments or just thoughts on line staff as well as supervisors and managers?
I'm keep finding myself thinking, is the intent to replace the human element? And I think we lose a lot of that with the use of technology. I think it can enhance processes to a degree, but I think that in our industry there is a human element that really I'm not sure can be replicated or should be replicated, because it pigeonholes it. It takes away from the idea of doing individual justice in individual cases. It takes out that application if we're relating everything back. So I don't know if that's a good thing or not. Maybe that would address the consistency of application of a particular law. So I'm curious as to what the rest of the group is thinking along those lines.
I can't really speak to much about how it is a good thing or a bad thing. I do think that generative AI is going to be an increasingly seductive thing. It is going to become increasingly attractive to use it, either overtly or covertly. It's going to become increasingly less expensive to use and rely on. It's going to add the benefit of electronic consistency, so generally what generative AI is, how it's going to respond every time, and you can go back and ensure that no one is tired or it's just before lunch and someone has forgotten a key element of a presentation or a routine that is necessary for legal reasons. And it also is increasingly providing the appearance of that human touch. We've already had presentations that have used ChatGPT, and the information is pretty decent in terms of how people would have phrased it personally. Some folks would have actually said that what ChatGPT comes up with is even better than how they might phrase a response to a specific question.
Absolutely. And I think those are really two important points, because courts we have to solve a lot of complex issues, and I separate a complex issue from a hard issue. When you're thinking about a hard issue, maybe you can have one person or one process come up with a solution. You think about like an algebra problem. If you know the formula and you just follow all the steps, you can fix it. But with courts, sometimes there's so many things going on, especially with self-represented persons that come in. We may be only seeing a tree in a forest of issues that they're having. And sometimes it does take a human being to be able to work with that person and be able to assess the nature of what they're going through. But I also look at AI. We don't know how far this is going to go and how good it's going to get. I think we're at a place where it's kind of a little bit of an unknown. This system just really learns, and it learns on its own. And there is some theory that by 2026, AI will have what's called AGI, sort of an artificial general intelligence, meaning it'll just be knowledgeable. They're saying just as knowledgeable as a human being. I don't know how true that is, but I know that AI is constantly learning, and there are various models. Like some models are good with maybe text, some are good with voice. There's some that are good with the law, but then at some point they want to get this thing so good that it can almost mimic a human being. So I think it's definitely something to look out for and just be knowledgeable of. I want to also think about some of our workplace and culture and technology with regards to our directors and administrative leadership. So when we think about responding to official complaints from court users, I'm thinking this is a situation where someone came into the courthouse, they did not have the best experience, it couldn't be solved by the frontline staff or the manager. Now there's an official complaint going out. And maybe in that complaint, they say they were mistreated for discriminatory reasons or something like that. We need to make sure that our directors and our administrative leadership is knowledgeable on how to investigate and how to respond to those things while still being efficient and equitable. And that's going to take time, especially now with having more knowledge about culture and different generations, how people have different sensitivity levels, different ways of viewing things. And so sometimes we're going to have to reach out to some of our other staff members to learn more about various cultures, because oftentimes things can happen based on misunderstandings. It's not always something was purposefully discriminatory, but it's like, what do our directors and leaders do when it gets to that point whereby we really have to come up with a solution? And then let's also think about our policies, our practices, and our procedures. So something as simple as our workplace policies. Are we making sure that the things that we're learning about different generations, or the ways that our families are made up now, we don't have traditional families, so that we need to go in and change the way that our policies look when someone can take leave for the death of a family member, right? Is it only just brother or sister, mom and dad, or do we start including people who may have come from blended families? We have to take a look at things from various angles based on the workplace culture. And I have to bring up COVID, because COVID has created a huge shift. After COVID, there was a lot with not only just social and racial justice, but in terms of people deciding the way they want to show up. Some people want hybrid work. They don't want to come into the office. And we're hearing now that some COVID cases are rising again. So how equipped are we to use our technology to assist with that? And when we think about our policies, that's something else we got to consider with our work. What does our workplace culture look like when people are not in the office? We have to find ways to really perfect this, because it seems to be it's a tug of war. Some people want to stay at home, some people want to come into the office, and in some instances both make sense. It's not really a clear-cut situation, and that's a tough call for many of the directors or the administrative leadership that may have that power and trying to balance that out. And then and if you do let some people work from home, what does that look like for the people who can't? Trying to keep things equitable. You can see that just balancing this out, the diligence, the efficiency, the equitableness, with being thorough and having everything done in the scope of the court professional's authority, it's not easy. I think also we can look into other things like our interview panels. Are we making sure that we are asking standardized questions to all applicants that are trying to come into our court system, right? This is a culture of making sure that we are equitable towards all applicants and making sure that they feel welcome, like they have a fair shot at getting a position. Because to some extent, at some courts, we have to deal with turnover, and we also have to make sure that we're keeping up our public trust and confidence. So we have to be mindful of these things. Technological concerns, again, I think when it comes to generative AI, we talked about a lot of the great things that it can do, but it also can create serious problems if it wants to attack our systems. And and administrators and leaders have to figure out how to best deal with that, how to make sure that we have our proper cybersecurity. There's also systems that are being rolled out right now that can help attorneys or even courts by using AI. But again, we have to combine, I think at this point, if we decide to use it, and I think in some instances, we are using AI without even knowing it in some applications, but I think it's going to take a combination of AI plus human intelligence. So you have to still look over it in the same way that we would look over spell check, even 15 years ago. You can't just use spell check and then expect that it corrected your document. It still takes that human intelligence to go back over it to make sure spell check is corrected in the way that you wanted it to. And I think that's something that we're going to see a lot with artificial intelligence. And judges and judicial leadership go through this as well. When we think about self-represented litigants versus an attorney, sometimes we have people that come into the courts, they're representing themselves, they receive an order, and they want to speak to the judge, but we know you can't speak directly to the judge. Oftentimes you can't have those ex parte communications. And if someone is to do something like try to find out where a judge is sitting, how are the judges equipped to deal with that? Are we making sure that they know how to sort of diffuse a situation if that happens? It's can be somewhat of a security concern. When we think about equitable treatment, even when the judges are maybe writing something, or they're talking to someone, or they're in public, do they have the tools to know what the latest cultural and technological trends are? Because it's changing at a rapid pace. That's one of the things with this culture and technology. It's like you can learn about something and almost, a year later or 6 months later, there's major changes and developments, and that can be difficult. So it's not to say that we're not equipped, but we really do have to take time to stay up to date. That's why I'm glad that NACM is doing things like the DEI guide, the AI guide, and just staying up to date on these things, because it is ever changing. And it's going to be on us to really make sure that we keep up with it. I think when it comes to judges, the relationship building is going to be important with that piece too. So that relationship between the judicial administration and the court administration, because they're going to rely on each other to keep up to date. I think that's the only way, because there's times when you think that you're up to date and you're not, just because of the fast pace. I don't remember workplace culture and technology ever moving this fast in the past. I mean, Chat GPT and AI was released to the public last November, and here we are in August. It's not even a year later, and it's everywhere. It's in every news article. It's almost coming up in every field, every industry. We're seeing lawsuits. I mean, you would think that this thing has been out for the last 10 years, and I know that it's been worked on for the last 8 to 6 years, but the public hasn't had access to it. Now that we have the public has access, there's been so much about it, and so we have to keep that in mind. I think judges have to deal with the deep fakes, the fake evidence, fake audio, and just being prepared to let their law clerks know, that this could be going on. You got to equip their law clerks as well as their staff. I think we're going to continue to see more changes and more progress, but if we stay diligent, diligence is one of those things. We stay diligent, we stay on top of it. I think we can use some of this towards our advantage. And maybe there's going to be areas where we have to draw the line on some of it. I don't think we have all the answers, but I think today I just wanted to foster that discussion and just make sure that we think about the challenges that workplace culture and AI from the standpoint of ethics. And this is just Canon 1.1. I mean, if we look at all those other canons, I'm sure we can find other things, but just this one canon, I think Canon 1.1 alone, there's a lot to think about and a lot of challenges, which is why I think even earlier when we were having our ethics discussion, sometimes it is very important just to go, canon by canon, section by section, and really flesh it out.
I don't know about anybody else's experience, but the wheels of justice, as mighty as they are, they turn, but they turn slow. So, my concern is, and I'll use Missouri as an example. If the Supreme Court wants to change a rule, they have to post that for 6 months. Well, to your example that you used, this technology came out less than a year ago and it's already changed. So if they have to post a rule change or the availability of use from some type of technology, it has to, before the rule can even become effective, be out for 6 months for comment. So by the time that's done, the way that technology is advancing, that technology is already essentially obsolete. And we've moved on to something else. So is the juice worth the squeeze? I mean, and how much does that impact? You're talking about if we're looking at structuring, and you can't change technology without changing the culture, but if you're looking at AI technology producing documents and doing presenting arguments, all these different things, what does that look like for the appellate courts? How are they going to, are we going to allow, I guess my question overall would be, are we going to allow a thing such as technology as ingrained in our existence as it is to completely dismantle the judicial system as we have known it? What did that look like? That's kind of terrifying for me.
And I understand why you use that word, because there's a lot of unknown in this space. And I think that's what makes it challenging, is that we don't know where this is going to go and how fast it's, is it going to continue to get faster, from November to now, but now as it keeps increasing, are the changes going to be every 1 month? There's a lot of unknown to this.
Boy, for all the attention this has gotten, I still don't, maybe I'm on a different planet, but I still don't see it. If your flight gets canceled and you need to reach an airline, good luck. And I know they try to embrace automation and customer response more than just about any other industry, but you can't even get yourself out of a canceled flight in Pittsburgh. If they lose your suitcase, you can't even find it. We've been using AI. We thought, okay, fine. It's the AI stampede. Everybody's talking about it. Let's do a rights advisory video. Because we've always wanted to do a rights advisory video in the past, because the judges have to recite that same rights script 500 times a year and they get really bored, and it's not a good use of really expensive judge time. So let's do a rights advisory video. We'll hop into one of those talking head AI generated videos where anytime we want to change the script by a phrase, we don't have to reshoot the whole thing. We don't have to hire a $10,000 videographer. We just revise the script, and the AI talking head just revises it. And that way we can revise the video every day if we want. We can make it site specific. We can make it court specific. We can make it offense specific. All these really cool features that we were never able to do before and never made rights advisory videos worth the trouble. Well, we've been trying that for 2 weeks now, and they're still incredible. And we used some of the best providers, and they're still incredibly wooden and stiff, and the inflections are bad. And I just don't see, and I know I heard one of the AI brains passed I think the California bar exam at 90%. So I've heard stuff like that, but for all the discussion, we can't even get a talking head video that's smooth enough to even come close to a human. So I just don't see it. I don't see the practical applications for the courts yet.
I think you articulated what I was saying very well. I just don't, how do we, in our current system, the way that it is, without dismantling it and making all of these things possible, what is its place here? I think that's, I don't know that yet. I mean, I'm not saying I want to go back to paper files, right? Like, I'm not saying to do away with technology in its totality, but I think it's really difficult in leadership to determine when do you go, when do you stop, how far, what's been proven. We're still waiting on the decisions of appeals from video trials during COVID to see what that even looks like, and that's just video conferencing like we're doing right now. What does that look like? So again, I'm in that, is at least 2 years that we've been kind of waiting to see what the outcome of some of those things were. So I don't know that the court will ever be able to keep up with the pace of technology. And I don't know that it is our duty to do so.
At the risk of being a voice in the wilderness actually espousing this, let me suggest 4 areas where I think that AI is affecting the court now or could in the near future. One is with pretrial risk management. We're all familiar with this is a lot in the country, and it's very controversial. But overall, even with the controversy, most statistical analysis says that it is more predictively accurate than a human, i.e. a judge, making that kind of decision. They come up with better results. Sometimes it's like maybe 5 or 10% more accurate, that they show up for court more often, and that they commit fewer crimes when they're out because of the predictiveness of the risk management. It's just a short hop from that to predictive sentencing. In fact, I think that probably covertly it's already happening in some areas, but it's a lot easier to use and sometimes even use the pretrial risk management algorithm to determine the best sentence for the defendant once the case is concluded. Third, I can think of that supposedly very close, so there's going to be a huge cultural and political fight on this, and that is language translation. Everything that I have seen is that when we started with your translator on your iPhone, if you went to France and you press the button about how to say, tell me where the best restaurant is in town, it would translate word for word. It would sound extremely clunky, but the Parisian would know at least basically what it is you were asking. They would probably tell you where the best place is to get croissants. Supposedly with large language modules now, it is fluidly translating so that the smartphone now is saying something that is in basically perfect French. The fourth example that I can think of, and I know that there's going to be an even larger and more vicious fight, is voice to text. That could take audio recordings and be able to pretty much seamlessly record them to the written form for transcripts.
The last two that you mentioned make so much more sense to me for transcription and interpreting services. The one, the predictive sentencing, and even I can even get behind the pre-sentencing reports and things like that, because that is just a formula that even if a human is entering in the answers, that same thing is going to happen ideally. But the predictive sentencing, so we're just going to take judicial independence and autonomy and toss that. I'm struggling with that one. I don't know. Maybe I live on the same planet with Carl. I don't know.
But I listened to a presentation yesterday about the self-driving cars in San Francisco. And there was a situation where one of the self-driving cars was trying to merge onto a highway.
I saw that.
And nobody would let the car in. And so it stopped and created a gigantic traffic jam because there was nobody sitting in a driver's seat to wave to a driver next door, please let me in. And so they'll give you a gap. I mean, I don't think there's any automated phone system anywhere that doesn't drive the regular customers crazy. They're just so poorly responsive. I mean, if I can't get a phone tree or an automated phone response system, or a robocall to my cell phone for that matter, that doesn't sound like a robot and isn't really aggravating, how on earth would we ever defer determinations on release of potentially violent offenders to a system that can't even find my lost suitcase?
You need an Apple AirTag, okay?
I'm from Idaho, and frankly, it's kind of like the Wild West meets Little House on the Prairie, in that we are so far behind on technology that I almost just don't feel like I can even contribute, because to get that sort of AI technology is so far in advance for Idaho. They're so reluctant to do any sort of technology or put forth any money for technology that I feel like we would be one of the last states to implement something like that.
I think that's a great observation. I mean, rural courts are certainly a hot topic right now, and their access to justice and different things. So I think that is a great point. Who knows what that looks like?
Right. And COVID definitely demonstrated that, and that with rural communities, so many people still don't have internet access, cell phones. It made it very difficult. You know, we had to have kiosks set up in the courthouses, even though we didn't want people coming to the courthouse. If you didn't have internet access, where are you supposed to go to conduct Zoom court? So they would be in the courthouse via Zoom, but still in the courthouse. So technology does have its place. I'm not against some technology, but like I said, I think we're just so far behind that to try and contribute to this conversation was a bit difficult.
I think you were spot on with that.
I would just say for Richmond, we are a large municipality. However, we are still very, very behind in advancing in technology. In fact, there are services we'd like to use for the public. However, telephones are not allowed in the courthouse without a judge's approval. So even bringing those electronic devices in at this point is problematic for some of the public. So, you know, there's a cost factor that's always weighed in. And when we start to weigh what things we have to have, the city typically goes with those things are essential right at this moment versus what could potentially be an advancement for the public.
Great point. Well, we are out of time, but I appreciate everybody joining. If you will just hang on, I'll finish out our meeting.
Thanks for joining us today. The Question of Ethics Conversation is a regular segment on ethics, courts, and court administration. Today's episode will be available on our website, in the Court Manager Journal, on the Court Leader website, on YouTube, Facebook, iTunes, LinkedIn, and on Twitter. Become part of the conversation. Join us live when we hold the Question of Ethics Conversation. Episodes are held immediately following the monthly NACM Ethics Subcommittee meeting on the third Thursday of the month. Check the NACM Committee webpage for the schedule and Zoom link. If you have questions, comments, or ideas for future conversations, email us. Our address is ethics@nacmnet.org. Did you hear an interesting comment by one of the panelists that you would like to listen to again, but you don't want to search the entire episode to find it? The Additional Resources section on the webpage has a question time marker sheet. Find the discussion question on the sheet, and next to it is the time that question was asked. You can quickly fast forward to that time and listen to the panel's comments. Remember, if you don't have time to watch an episode, you can always listen to the audio version. Listen in your car or on the bus, on your way to or from work. You never have to miss an episode. I'm Pete Kiefer, and on behalf of our guests, the Court Leaders website, and the National Association for Court Management, thank you, and have a great day. The views, information, and opinions expressed during this episode are solely those of the host and the individual presenters. They do not necessarily represent the position of the National Association for Court Management.